The Roland TR-303 is one of the most iconic synths to ever exist. You've heard it times and times again in songs like Da Funk by Daft Punk or I Feel Love by Donna Summer and even Sexy and I Know It by LMFAO. It's such an iconic and specific sound that everyone was seeking after it. Now, of course, when there's a high demand and low supply, you know what happens to the price. But luckily, there are companies such as Beringer who are able to bring us iconic sounds for not iconic prices. This is the Behringer TD-3. This is the box you get when you order the TD-3. It's made out of super heavy-duty cardboard and is very sturdy. And the design on it is simple and also just very nice. But you're probably way more interested into what's inside the box than what's outside. And the very first thing is the TD-3 itself. This goes right back in the box to these styrofoam blocks that have cutouts to support the knobs. Next, you're going to get a piece of plastic that has the manual in it, and as well has some Beringer stickers here in the back. That sits right on top. And finally, you get a box that when you open it, contains the power adapter. Close that back up, and that goes right in this slot here. And we'll just close back up the box. And that's everything that's included with the TD-3. Now I have to take it back out so that we can actually use it. I'll be right back. Alright, now that it's out of the box, let's plug it in and start using it. Setting this up is a relatively simple process. There's many different ways you can set it up, so let's go through a couple of them. Obviously, we need to provide the box with power, so we're going to plug in the adapter into an outlet and then into the DC adapter in the back. Now, if you're configuring this into a studio setup, this is how you do that. If you take the MIDI out from a MIDI keyboard and plug it into the MIDI in of the TD-3, you can now accept MIDI data from that keyboard. You can also take the USB port on the TD-3 and plug that into your computer and now use the TD-3 as a MIDI keyboard. Or take the output from the TD-3 and plug that into the input on an audio interface for recording purposes. Say you're doing a band practice or something. At that point, what you can do is just take the output of the TD-3 and just plug it into a normal amp. Or say you're playing by yourself. At that point, all you have to do is take a pair of headphones, plug it into the phone's port on the TD-3, and now you can practice by yourself without disturbing any of your neighbors. Now say you're playing a live gig with the TD-3. You're going to take the output of the TD-3 and plug that into your mixing console, which is then connected to the speakers and everything. Or say you want to perform with multiple TD-3s. You can chain them together in a poly system by connecting the MIDI through to the MIDI in of the next system, so on and so forth until you have as many TD-3s as you want, with the output of each going into your mixing console if you're doing this in a live setting. So we've got our TD-3 all set up. I'm using the studio setup I talked about earlier where I have it plugged in the back, and when it's time for us to start actually hearing what the synth sounds like, I will plug in a 1/4 inch into my audio interface and record it that way. But before we start doing that, we should talk about what all of this stuff does. So let's start here at the top and we'll work our way across and then down the rows. We'll start here with these 6 knobs that are referred to as the synthesizer section. This first section here is tune, which adjusts the frequency of the oscillator approximately 1 octave on either side, meaning that when we twist it this way, our sound will go approximately 1 octave up, and when we twist it to the left, it'll go an octave down, and then obviously everywhere in between. So I'll just keep that in the middle for now. Next here we've got the cutoff, which adjusts the cutoff frequency of the low pass filter, meaning that the frequencies above the cutoff will be toned down and the frequencies below the cutoff will be allowed to pass through as normal. Next to that is the resonance, which is going to adjust the amount of emphasis given to the signal level at the cutoff frequency, meaning that at the cutoff frequency that is determined by the cutoff knob, the resonance will give a little peak to that frequency and make it a little more aggressive of a sound. Now the fourth knob is the envelope, which is the depth of the modulation applied by the envelope generator to the cutoff frequency. This is something that's easier when we turn the synthesizer on and I can actually show you a graph of the frequencies and what it actually does. So I'll hold off until we do that to further explain that. Decay is related to the envelope in that it controls the amount of time taken for the envelope to decay from the current level down to the minimum level. Again, when we turn on the frequency graph, it'll be much more clear what this actually does. And lastly is accent, which adjusts the amount of accent given to the output for any notes that are programmed with an accent, which is this button here. We will get to that. And now to the right of these knobs is the patch bay. These are all 3.5mm input and output connections. This first one here is filter in, which allows the connection of an external audio signal instead of the internal oscillator. Next is the sync in, which allows the use of an external clock and a start-stop signal. Next is CV out, which is the control voltage. And next to that is the gate out. And last on here is headphones, so you can jam by yourself without disturbing others. And now to the right of that, we have here the distortion section. Now about these three knobs, these are only going to have any sort of effect when the distortion is actually switched to on. Now first is the distortion or drive, which is the amount of distortion given to the signal. Next to that is the tone, which is the actual tone of the distortion. And finally, the level, which is the actual volume of the distortion output. Now this whole row is just kind of general controls for everything. First, we have the tempo knob, which I bet you can't guess what this does. It adjusts the rate at which the pattern in the tracks play, from slow to fast. Tempo. Next is the waveform selector, which changes the internal oscillator from a reverse sawtooth to a pulse or square wave. Next is the track and pattern group. We will go over that when it's time to make tracks and patterns, but you can select from 7 different tracks and 4 different patterns. Next to that is the mode switch, where you can write a pattern, play a track, write a track. And then next to this is the logo and a power LED. It tells you if the machine is on. It's on. Next to that is the distortion switch, which turns on or off the distortion and makes these 3 knobs active. And the last on this side is the volume, which bet you can't guess what it does again. Quiet, loud. Now finally, the bottom row. This is known as the sequencer section. Starting at the top, we have the DC bar reset clear button, which is used to clear a pattern from memory, return a track to the beginning, and signal that the last pattern is being added to a track. It's a very multi-use button. Here we have pitch mode, which sets the machine into pitch mode and allows you to play pitches. Next we have our 13-note keyboard, which function as a keyboard, but these lower 8 switches down here also are used when creating, saving, and selecting or adding patterns. Next we have the time mode section, which is used when adding notes, transposing notes up and down, adding accents, adding slides, all of that stuff. We'll get more specific into this in just a second. Then we have the back button, which allows you to move backwards in your patterns if you want to add an accent or a slide or change a note or move it up and down in an octave. Now back on this side, we have the start stop. It starts and stops. Function, it does a lot. It returns the TD-3 back to normal mode after pitch mode and time mode and various things. It does a lot. We'll see. Then we have the light that lets you know it's in normal mode. Now skipping over the keyboard, next we have our transpose down, note, and step button, which transposes the note downward in pitch mode, enters a note in time mode, and enters the amount of steps in a pattern. Now next to that we have transpose up, tie, and triplet, which is used to transpose up an octave in pitch mode, enter a tie in time mode, and set the pattern to triplet mode. Next to that we have the accent and pattern A button, which allows an accent to be added to a note in pitch mode and to select A patterns such as 1A, 2A, 3A, so on. Next to that we have slide and pattern B, which allows a slide to be added in pitch mode and select B patterns such as 1B, 2B, whatever. Now finally, the last button is the DS Write Next Tap button, which allows a pattern to be written to a track, select the next note in a pattern, and to add manual timing by tapping. Now here we are on the rear panel of the TD-3. First we have our output, which is a 1/4 inch to line level, a normal 1/4 inch jack. Now we have the MIDI out, which is a 5-pin jack used to output MIDI data, as well as pass through MIDI data received from the input. And now we have the MIDI in, which is another 5-pin jack used to receive MIDI data from an external source, like a MIDI keyboard or a hardware sequencer or something. Now we have the USB port, which is a USB Type-B jack, which allows connection to a computer. The TD-3 is also class compliant, which means it supports MIDI in and out through the USB port. Next to this is the power button, which turns the power on and off. Now next to that is the DC in, which allows you to power it and turn it on and use it. Now that we are familiar with every single one of these buttons, it's time to turn it on and start making some music. I've already shown you how to set it up, so make sure you do that in the way that best fits your needs. I have mine in the studio setup with a 1/4-inch cable going into an audio interface for recording purposes. Make sure whenever you plug it in, you use the included power adapter and have the volume turned down on the system as well as on your speakers, just in case of any pops. Now, whenever you're turning the system on, you want to leave it for about 15 minutes to let the internal circuits warm up for about 15 minutes. Maybe a little longer if it's been cold out. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes, so what I'm going to do now is take this headphone port and plug it in to the headphone jack here on the TD-3. This is just so that we can hear things before we actually get to recording. Now, the first thing I'm going to want to do is actually tune the TD-3. So what I'm going to do is make sure my volume is turned all the way down, which it already is, and I'm going to set the mode to pattern play. Now I'm going to press and hold the pitch mode switch and then press A. Now every time that we go to press right or next, you're going to hear an A. And now what we can do is we can take our tuner, set it down there, and now we just play our tuning note and make sure it's actually in tune, which it is. Perfect. Now this process also works with other notes besides A, like say you wanted to tune the note G instead. We just press pitch mode in G, or say you wanted to tune the C. So let's say we want to have our TD-3 set to something that's not 440. So we're going to go into our tuner and we're going to type in something like 432. Now our tuner set to 432, our TD-3 is still at 440, which means when we play our tuning note, we're going to be something 30 odd cents sharp. So what we're going to do is take our tune knob and just pull that down. There we go. And we are now set to 432. It's just that easy to tune your TD-3. Alright, we finally made it through all the boring stuff. Now let's make some music. Let's learn how to sequence the TD-3. We first need to find a place to save our pattern. Now here in the track pattern group, we have our 4 groups with 7 tracks. Now some of these are connected together, like 1 and 2 are both part of group 1, and then 3 and 4 are both part of group 2. So for right now, I'll just leave this at group 1, track 1, and then I want to save it on pattern 1 here, because each one of these tracks has 8 patterns that can be assigned to it. As well as the 8 patterns that can be assigned, we also have an A pattern and a B pattern. So basically every track has 16 patterns that you can save to it. So I'll set mine to track 1, pattern 1 here, and then group A. Make sure that is illuminated. Just in case there's already a pattern there, I'm going to press the pattern and clear. Now it should be empty. We press start stop to see that it is. So first, before we write anything, let's make sure that we are actually in pattern write mode. Now from there, we press pitch mode, which allows us to enter our notes. Now the TD-3 defaults to 16 step patterns, but if you want anything other than that, what you would do is you would hit function and then press the step button, the amount of steps that you want. Now once we have the length of our pattern, we can start entering notes. So let's enter pitch mode and begin entering our notes. First we have a G, then a B flat, then another G, then an F, then an E flat, then 3 C's, 2 E flats, then an F, a G, a B flat, a G, a C, and another G. We press pitch mode to return to the beginning of the pattern, and now we can go through with the next button to each individual note. Now that we have all the notes inserted, we can go to the next button and start adding accents and slides and octave changes. We're going to go to this G here, transpose it down. Now if we press back, we see it is now an octave down. This B flat is going to be an octave up. This G here is going to have a slide on it. This F is going to be an octave up. This E flat is going to have an accent and a slide. This C is going to be transposed down and have an accent. This second C is also going to be transposed down, have an accent and a slide. This third C, just an accent. This E flat is going to be transposed up and have a slide. The next E flat is going to be transposed down. This F is going to be transposed up with a slide. The G, up, accent, and a slide. The B flat transposed down. The G transposed down with a slide. The C, slide and down. And the last G, a slide. So now if we press function to get out of pitch mode and we start playing it, you'll notice that nothing happens. Remember, as I said earlier, that there's two steps of programming the TD-3. There's pitch and then there's time. We technically gave pitch information to the instrument, but not time information. So let's go back and do that. Now we'll have to press this button right here, which puts us into time mode. You'll see the LED light up. Now you see with time mode, we're allowed to give 16th notes, ties, and 16th rests. Now every note in this pattern is a 16th note, so I just have to continuously press the 16th note. 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And you'll notice that it boots us out of time mode as soon as we get back to the pattern. And now, if we press play, we actually have a pattern that we can hear and understand. Sequencing on the TD-3 isn't the most intuitive process in the world, but once you do get a hang of it, it does become easier. And by not the most intuitive, I mean it's just bad. The sequencer on the TD-3 and the original 303 are just bad. And because of that, it can be a little bit of a challenge to explain it properly. So I want to make a separate video on the sequencer on the TD-3 so I can go more in depth, because this video is already getting kind of long. So if you have any questions about the sequencer on the TD-3, leave them in the comments and I will more than likely address them in a video that is just dedicated on sequencing the TD-3 and any other miscellaneous questions. Let's look at what some of these parameters do. I will play a single note on the TD-3 and start changing the cutoff so you can see how it affects. This is it all the way turned to the left. And you can see as I'm increasing the cutoff, we're getting more frequencies up in the higher. And as I shut down the cutoff, less frequencies in the high range. Let's turn that back to the middle. Now with the resonance, as I turn it from left to right, you can see some of the peaks are now getting a little bit emphasized, and as I turn it back to the left, those peaks no longer get emphasis. That's what the resonance does. It emphasizes frequencies that are based on the cutoff frequency. Now for the envelope, we'll turn that all the way to the left. Now you see very briefly as we have it all the way to the right, we're getting high frequencies that then immediately get cut down. But then as we turn the envelope down, those frequencies don't show through. And now if I raise up the resonance and I do the same thing to the envelope, you can see what's happening a little bit more drastically. I'll leave those both up. And now the decay, you can really see those frequencies getting messed up in the higher areas around 7,500 hertz. And as I turn up the decay, you can see that time is getting longer for it to reach that point. So now to play our pattern, we just make sure we select the right track and pattern group. We select it from the 8 options down here, and then we just hit start stop. You can control the volume from the volume knob. We can turn on distortion. Maybe turn that up a little bit. You can increase the tempo with the tempo knob. You can also slow it down. And now we can control all the parameters up here that we were talking about earlier. That is everything you need to know to get started on the Behringer TD-3. If you learned something, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube things. If you have a question, leave it in a comment and I'll do my best to try to answer them. This really is an incredible machine for an incredible price, and you get an incredible sound. And I think that speaks for itself. This machine will definitely have a spot in my studio for a long time to come. And with that said, thank you again for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.